How do you advise founders on choosing the right activation metric, right metric to focus on in this early stage of onboarding?
In general, I have some controversial opinions here, which I will share, but caveat that they're not shared universally. An activation metric should correlate with long-term retention. So if you activate this week, you should be more likely to be active in 6 months. It should also demonstrate both retention and also sophistication, some sort of use that indicates that a habit or value has been found, that a certain feature that's important has been used. And probably around 20% of your customers should be able to reach that metric. Now, the last piece is controversial. Many activation metrics that I've seen in working with companies can be more narrow. So, you have to do this set of 5 or 7 things in order to be activated, and only a small percentage of customers get there. The reason why I don't like very, very narrow activation metrics is they tend to over-focus to me on what the company projects as being value for the user, rather than measuring if the user has found value themselves, which is often best measured by them coming back and continuing to visit and build a habit over time. So I would prefer to go with something a little bit more broad. The other thing I'll say is it's helpful to do an exercise in correlation and ideally causation to understand if some early things that users do in the product ultimately correlate with retention, as I mentioned before. But that exercise is not one I would spend too much time on, because the reality is, especially in earlier stages, your customer base is going to evolve and change pretty dramatically in the years following when you define that metric. And you'll probably want to change it and revise it to something that reflects actually what your users are doing today with the features that you've launched, rather than the ones that were a focus yesterday. So I wouldn't spend too much time really trying to find the perfect metric, recognizing that it will evolve.
What would an example of that be when you said about the correlation and causation, just so I understand what that actually means in real life?
I think a great example to call on Airtable would be if a creator of a new base, which is the spreadsheet interface that's central to the Airtable product, were to build something of substance. So there's some number of entries in that spreadsheet, and bring a collaborator into that base to work with them. That to me would be a signal, and I've done the math, so I can tell you that's correct, that they're much more likely to keep using Airtable 6 months from now, because they've done substantial work. They've brought in a collaborator in a product that's designed for teams. And together, those two people are working on something that they can ultimately grow into a more sophisticated deployment of the product over time.